I'm Jordan Palmer with Common Thread Collective and Peta Palms over here. And today we're going to talk about how to get away from pitching and how to move towards sharing. So first things first, I by no means proclaim to be a master salesperson or have closed X amount of millions of dollars in deals. By no means. I don't have a book on sales. There's a million of them. Where I'm coming from right now is I've been doing this for a couple of years. I have presented our services to people and they've said no, and some people have said yes. And where I just currently am right now is continually trying to look inside and see how the process can be improved and where I can be more authentic. And the reality is I've come to a conclusion right now where I want to get away from the idea of pitching people services, trying to convince them to work with us in some capacity. And I want to move towards the idea that like what we do can actually help. And so I want to share how we can be helpful. And it's not even just in the languaging, it's actually in like the ethos of how I'm presenting things to folks and ultimately how they're receiving it. And so when we go through a pitch deck, it's like anybody else who's selling services. And so anybody who's watching this, you may be selling real estate, you may be selling services, you may be selling a product, or you may be interviewing for a job and selling yourself. Here's a couple of steps that I think can be really helpful as we go through it to make sure that it's very consistent, and at the end of the day, the person that's receiving this information from you is generally walking away going, this person can or can't help me with the thing that I'm trying to do. So the first step in this process for me is to understand the current state. When I'm talking to a brand, I want to let them talk in the beginning and I want to ask questions and let them share where they're currently at. And I know that's not some groundbreaking idea. Any sales book's the first chapter is gonna be about letting the other people talk, but it's not so much about letting them talk, it's more about understanding the current state of where they're at. We're an e-commerce, an online sales agency, and so for us it's trying to help somebody scale their online revenue. Well, it's really important for me to understand, did they just raise money? Are they trying to raise money? Did they just fire their CMO? Did they just get off Kickstarter? Did they just hire 7 people? Did they just fire an agency? What is the current state of their business? It's really important to understand that because I can go ahead and be so tied into what we do and how it can be helpful for what my understanding of where their business is. And I could get through the entire process and realize I was just talking to somebody who I lost them in the beginning because I didn't really even understand who I'm talking to and the current state of their business. The second thing I want to do during that first part of the conversation is I want to identify the language that they use to define themselves. A perfect example of this was early days at Kalo. I would talk to people and they would say things like, oh, I've seen that before. I know your brand. It's Qualo. You guys make the rubber ring things. And if it's just a consumer saying that to me or a friend of a friend or whatever, that's totally fine. But let's say that I was actually at Kalo and somebody was pitching me on services. They wanted to shoot content for us, or they wanted to work for us, or they wanted to do something for us. They would lose me there. You don't even know how to pronounce our name, and it's actually 95% medical grade silicone, and the language that we use is that we make functional wedding bands for couples living active lifestyles. So if I'm sharing my services of how we can help your brand grow, and I'm not using the same language that you use, I already, before I've even opened the deck, have clearly laid out the fact that I don't really understand who I'm talking to. And another example of this is we have a really exciting new client. It's called 10,000. And I can define 10,000 as one of 2 ways. They make like workout clothes for dudes, or they make premium performance training apparel for men. The language that they use is really important for me to understand. So in the phase where I'm sharing our services, and now when we're actually working with them, it's really important that at some point we all get aligned. The point of this content that I'm putting out right now is to make sure that this is coming up in the first interaction you have with the brand. When you're understanding the current state, also identify the language that they're using to define themselves. The next thing I want to do is find the overlap. Call it a Venn diagram. Here's what we do, here's what they do, what's left over in the middle. But during that first phase, before I even go through a whole presentation, I want to understand from a 30,000 foot view, what are the things that they need? measured against the things that we pride ourselves on being good at. It's as simple as finding that overlap. So I'm not sitting here presenting everything that we do when the reality is they may only need content. Or they may have somebody in-house that does content, they really only need influencer. So I'm using that first phase to understand the current state and to identify the language that they use to define themselves, so that I can help figure out what the overlap is, which is going to channel everything that I want to talk about with whatever it is that whatever services I'm sharing with them. So the next phase we get to is where I'm actually presenting the services and what we do. And again, this isn't for e-commerce agencies only. This is whatever it is that you're presenting and selling to somebody. I want to efficiently articulate the advantage of us. So once I understand their current state, the language they use, and where the overlap is, now I can channel everything into where we can provide an advantage that potentially no one else can provide. And this isn't about making things up. There is a lot of stuff that we do here that other agencies do as well. And they may even do it the exact same way. Which for me would be a dead end if we didn't have an amazing culture and really talented people and people who really care about getting results, and the way that we set up our deal structures and making sure that everyone's incentivized and there's an alignment on what success looks like. Whatever the net result of what I believe is our advantage and the advantage of working with us, it's not just about selling that, it's about efficiently articulating the advantage of working with us. And the last thing I really want to do now is I want to listen. I want to be able to figure out how to respond. I went on a Lululemon retreat a few years ago, and I always felt like yoga people were very present. People who did yoga were very present. Even Corey, who works here at Common Thread, he's got a little like Shavasana tattooed on him, which is really cool looking, but he was always very present. And so I went on this Lululemon retreat, and I really went with one goal, and to figure out a new definition of what presence meant. And I left there with an amazing line that somebody just said to me in passing. They said, don't listen to somebody talk so that you can decide how to respond. Listen so that you can truly understand what they're trying to say. So for me, this last phase, once I've gone through each step, understanding the current state, the language that they're using, the overlap, why us, the last thing I want to do is really genuinely listen. Not so that I can figure out how to sell them on something, but so I can figure out if the overlap is really there and there is an advantage to us. I just want to listen so that I can understand what they're really trying to do, and then we can move it to the next phase and figure out how to work together. Whether that's connecting somebody, sending them a deck, sending them a contract, setting up a follow-up conversation, setting up a Google Hangout with their partners, whatever it is, that next phase, the most important part of this is making sure that once we've gone through these first couple steps, that I'm actually listening so that I can understand exactly where that brand is currently at. So hopefully this is helpful. Again, you may be selling real estate, services, you may be a coach, and you may be interviewing for a job or selling a product. Either way, it's an interesting process to really look at. And if you really take a step back and you look at just everything we just talked about in a couple minutes, there's a lot of listening happening, and there's a lot of sharing happening, not a lot of selling happening. Thanks.